Good afternoon. Welcome to Penn's Perspectives on Company Roots. Today I'm interviewing Jamie Wang and Sarah Rains, both co-presidents of Hack4Impact. Thank you for coming on today. It's a privilege to interview and to connect with both of you. I'm Nicholas von Klitzing, and I'm a rising freshman at the Wharton School, and I'm from Switzerland. We always start off our interviews with the same question, so brace yourselves. What are your roots and how did they help you in shaping your ideas and becoming the person you are today?
Jamie, do you want to take it first or do you want me to go first?
Either of you. I guess Sarah, you can start.
Sure. Okay, so I've actually watched some of your past interviews, so I'm prepared. Not super prepared though. So I'm originally from Wayland, which is a suburb of Boston, in Massachusetts. I grew up there for 18 years of my life, and then came to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So I haven't lived a lot of places. Both my parents are doctors, so I think they really instilled in me the importance of education, work ethic, and the importance of doing something like meaningful and impactful that's helping people. So I'd say like Wayland, Massachusetts was an awesome place to grow up. Really good like schools and educational system, but I was definitely a bit sheltered. And I didn't really have like a lot of real jobs in high school. I think I like babysat a couple of times or maybe tutored. And then the summer after high school, I was a camp counselor and it was my first real job. And I think everybody should be made to like work a service job at least once, because I really developed an appreciation for the people who like make our everyday lives easier, whether it's, you know, a cashier or a waiter, or like I was a camp counselor. I kind of have more kind of funny stories about that, but came to Penn directly thereafter, finished my summer as a camp counselor, and 3 days later was on Penn's campus. Guess that, you know, the rest is history. I joined Hack4Impact as a sophomore, developed, led projects, and now I'm the co-director.
Oh, that's really great. I had some funny camp experiences myself. So just a quick follow-up. Do you think you've had lots of opportunities to continue this community service aspect at Penn?
Yeah, I think so, definitely. I think being part of Hack4Impact is really unique because, so before Penn, I was pretty actively involved with the Girl Scouts, and it was a lot of like food drives and like helping people in various ways you could as a high school student, as like a relatively like eager but unskilled person. And now that I'm developing like engineering skills in college, it's great to be able to use those to help nonprofits, especially when like, you know, the intersection of like the nonprofit and like charitable social impact space and kind of STEM and engineering is actually relatively small. And so I feel like Hack4Impact fills like a particular niche that helps nonprofits basically access technical work, access engineering help, have web apps built for them. But we can explain more about the purpose of the organization later.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, I think it's been great to already, you know, get to use my engineering degree to make the world a better place. And I plan to kind of continue that after graduation, whether, you know, it's working at socially minded companies or labs, starting my own venture, or just getting involved in kind of extracurricular charity or social impact work.
Yeah, that sounds really great. How about you, Jamie?
Yeah, for sure. Kind of similar to Sarah, I like grew up and spent my entire life in one place. So I am initially from the suburbs outside of Atlanta. And I guess, God, where do I want to start? I guess in high school, I think I was involved in a lot of like, I guess like activism kind of based organizations and like volunteering organizations. So I did a lot of activism with our schools, like one of our schools like LGBT. I think one of our like schools only LGBT organizations, and then did a lot of stuff with like women's empowerment. At some point like worked as well for like as a tutor for like a refugee organization, which was a really interesting experience, I would say. Kind of came to college like, so background behind this, like I am not getting an engineering degree. I am in Wharton. I'm studying like finance and management. I'm getting a CS minor, but I think that's something I like more so kind of fell into kind of as a result of my experience with Hack4Impact, I would say. I came to Penn not really like super knowing what I wanted to get involved in, but did want to continue a lot of that like volunteering and kind of like community work that I'd done in the past. So I initially freshman year had gotten involved with one of our on-campus organizations called Civic House. Did one of their like kind of like just regular weekly volunteering programs at this organization called Books Through Bars my freshman year. And then I think kind of like through that experience, I wanted to get more involved with kind of the operations of a nonprofit, and not necessarily in the sense that like I wanted to like work for a nonprofit, but I was like able to see a lot of the nonprofits that I worked with in the past like had issues with like tech. There were a lot of things that were like outdated, whether it was like processes or like the software that they used. And I was like, oh, this is like a problem that I didn't realize that it was like people are actually working towards this. So I kind of like discovered Hack4Impact on, I would say it was actually kind of random. I discovered it on like a Piazza post, maybe like a day or two before the actual application was due, and ended up applying as initially a business developer. So more in charge of like the client relationships, impact assessment, things like that, instead of like a developing role. And I guess from there, it's mostly been like my experience in H4I is less on the development side, more on the project sourcing, getting to like know the nonprofit clients, getting to kind of like talk through them about their problems and how our organization can help. They've just been super interesting. I think I've like personally learned a lot through that in terms of social impact. So yeah, I don't know what I'm gonna do with it in the future. I think it definitely is a huge part of like what I want to do eventually. I'm writing a thesis on it actually. I think that's like probably one of the main things, but other than that.
Oh. So you both seem to have similar interests. I was wondering, how do you guys end up meeting? Was it at Hack4Impact, or how did you come across each other?
It definitely was through H4I. Or like I actually, no,
I think
we met our freshman year, I think, at a,
but I don't know how.
Event.
At what event?
At a Rush event.
Oh yeah. I think we met at some Rush event for a frat, but I didn't actually get to know Jamie until we joined Hack4Impact. And Jamie was kind of in that business developer role, and then over time, like Jamie, like the joke that Jamie likes to make is like, oh, I don't code, or like I can't code, and it was like sort of true at first, but it's like really not true now. Like Jamie definitely knows how to code like very well. But yeah, I think what makes our like co-directorship so great is like, I think we balance each other out really nicely. I think Jamie like is very much like a visionary, like ideas person. Like she can see like the next 5 years of Hack4Impact, and that's awesome. And I'm like more of a pragmatist, like, okay, how are we gonna accomplish like the next 2 weeks of Hack4Impact? So I definitely think, you know, I've actually seen in like companies and like business organizations that I've been a part of that like sometimes the co-founding pair or like the co-directing pair kind of balance each other out in that way. And then we have we have 4 incredible other members of our executive board who do a lot of the legwork and contribute a lot as well.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you found a great partnership. And for our viewers who might not know too much about your work at Hack4Impact, could you please briefly explain what you do there?
Sure, I'll take it, and then Jamie will fill in the holes. So basically, Hack4Impact is a student-run 501c3 nonprofit organization. So we're a nonprofit that's run by students that helps other nonprofits by building like technical solutions to their problems. So a common problem that we might solve is like, you know, there might be this nonprofit and they have a lot of volunteers to manage, and they're doing it all in an Excel spreadsheet and with Google Forms, and it's really complicated. And you know, someone who helps run that organization, like maybe their passion is like education, or they're teaching kids, maybe that's what the nonprofit is focused on. But instead of focusing on what they're passionate about, they're like behind a computer doing Excel spreadsheets 50% of the week because like it just needs to get done. And so where we come in is we would provide a little to no cost solution that would maybe let them automatically manage their volunteers. And then, you know, the people who run the organization, who are responsible for all of this kind of like Excel spreadsheeting and follow-upping and kind of the not fun aspects of like running a nonprofit and getting to help people, can kind of put that aside and focus on making their organization better. And it's a really great like co-creation process. So, we love like meeting with our clients once a week. So we come up with like a project requirements document. We come up with all the features we're going to develop. We demo to them once a week. We actually more recently, we've been doing a lot of local Philly nonprofits. We've gone and volunteered with their organizations. For example, we went to the Ronald McDonald House, and that's an organization where families can say whose children are like critically ill and receiving care at CHOP. And so we did arts and crafts with the kids at the Ronald McDonald House. So it's really like this multifaceted involvement that we have with the organizations that we serve. So I think that's where I would start, but I'm sure Jamie would take the explanation elsewhere too. There's a lot to be said in terms of how we choose the projects that we choose, and also that's what we do. I guess that's our function or our job, but we also have a really strong underlying community too. So Jamie can do that half.
I can kind of talk a little bit. I think in general, I think the parts that Sarah hit on most of it, but I would talk a little bit more about just the people who are in Hack4Impact. So our club is normally around 35 students at Penn. The organization actually founded in 2014 by at Penn. But we have a national chapter, and it's expanded to around I would say 10 plus schools at this point, which has been really interesting because there's also a pretty large initiative on that side to kind of get involved and to actually meet people from other chapters like UIUC, Georgia Tech, Cal Poly, places like that. In terms of our chapter, we it's generally, we take on 3 to 4 projects a semester, usually in project teams of around 4 to 6 members. The size depends on how large the project is, how much resources we need to dedicate to it, things like that. But normally the project structure is one project manager, 1 tech lead, and then 3 or 4 developers.
Okay, no, it sounds really great. What would you say was your favorite project so far, either of you?
I got to lead a really incredible project with the Government Accountability Project, and they are a whistleblower advocacy organization. It's a lot of super long words. The gist of it is that a whistleblower is someone who sees something unethical going on, either in their business or place of work, or maybe they work for the government, they're seeing something unethical going on in the government, and they work to resolve these problems and moral deficiencies internally. But when they can't do that through the kind of chain of command, they publicize the wrongdoing in hopes of kind of pressuring their organization to change. And oftentimes when you join a company, you're kind of signing agreements that say you can't leak certain things that the company's working on internally. And then there's whistleblower laws that counteract that say, well, actually, if your company is doing something unethical, maybe it is legal or appropriate to leak those things. But yeah, it's hard to figure out, if you see something unethical going on, it's hard to figure out what laws are protecting you within your state, history of whistleblowing, if you can be a whistleblower, all of that stuff. And so we were working with this great contact called Dana, and we built basically an online resource or library where people can go in and see different resources about whistleblowing in kind of this centralized database. And so if you were a lawyer, a legal scholar, a professor, a student, or a potential whistleblower, you could learn more about kind of that field.
Wow, it sounds incredible. How about you, Jamie?
My favorite project is actually the one that Sarah mentioned a little while earlier, the one with Ronald McDonald, the Philadelphia Ronald McDonald House. And I was the PM on that project, so it was really interesting. We built did you already describe it, Sarah, or did you not? I wasn't entirely sure. I think
you went over it, but just
I
get more detail.
Got into it. So if you want to expand a little more, that's totally fine.
Yeah. So Sarah already went over what our RMD does, but so what we were doing is kind of that the same problem that a lot of nonprofits have, where like they're manually doing all this like data entry. And in this case, it wasn't an Excel spreadsheet. It was this like tiny like Azure database that people had to like physically fill out. So we built them I would call it like a room request kind of portal to help the family services unit kind of manage the applications coming in and better transfer them in an easier way to their existing database that they use. And I think the work necessarily wasn't my favorite part about the project. I think my favorite part of the project was the interaction that we had with the client. Like what we were talking about with like, because they are like so close to campus, we were able to go in like a few times to like volunteer with the kids who are actually there. And then it was also kind of a weird situation because this project kind of also happened towards the end of like last year when we were all like transitioning to like staying at home, like going, like leaving campus, like getting quarantined. I think at least for like Ronald McDonald like house, like that's a huge issue. So one of the things that I think actually maybe not even a lot of people in our club know about, we actually helped them like source a ton of like masks at some point to ship to the house, which I thought was like a really cool thing that we were like able to do, even outside of our like development capabilities. So.
Wow, that's really great. And I mean, if you have all these great projects going on, you must have a really great team as well. And I was wondering, when you recruit for new people on your team, what do you look for?
Jamie, you want to take this one and then I'll fill it in?
Oh, I'm so excited. So right now we're actually doing the cycle of recruitment. I am always so excited for this because it's really like interesting to meet people who are like both interested in social impact and tech. And I think that's probably like that's probably our starting point. People who are kind of interested in both things and like not only interested in just like, oh, I want to be on a project because I want to learn how to develop, or like I want to learn how to make like applications like this, but people who want to know more and want to get involved in like the community organizing or the community service, like volunteering, social impact side of things. And I think to that extent, like we do place a pretty heavy focus on like, how would you think about like engaging with a client? How would you think about engaging with the rest of the organization? Are you someone who like is passionate about like these issues and wants to talk more about them? Yeah, I think that's probably the main thing that comes to mind. Sarah, do you have anything?
Yeah, sure. I'm trying to think about what else I can fill in. Yeah, I think in terms of technical knowledge, our bar is actually relatively low. It's just like the equivalent of having taken one CS class before or having maybe done some personal projects. And the point is kind of like, as long as you know how to code, like at least a little bit, we'll teach you everything that you need to know. And I think that's particularly interesting because people, like there are certain classes at Penn where you'll kind of like learn how to make a website. Some examples might be like Nest 212 or like Sys 450. But people feel that the projects that we do are very meaningful and they tend to learn a lot technically. And we're not always taking on web apps. We've done some data analysis projects, some web scraping projects. So I think it's a great place for people to kind of take their technical skills up a notch too. And there's kind of this culture of like always learning and engaging with the content. So I guess we're really looking for people who are eager to learn. And also the second part of that is eager to learn now and then eager to like share knowledge and lead later. So part of our pipeline is like looking for people who we think, hey, maybe a semester or two from now, when they're not a first semester freshman or like when they haven't just joined the club, like maybe they can lead a project. Maybe we see them as being a member of exec. So our pipeline is actually pretty long in that way. And yeah, we're definitely looking for people who would be a good fit for our community, but I'd say our community is actually relatively diverse. Also in terms of like interests too. So it's not like there's one Hack4Impact personality. I think what's so great about our community is like, we'll do something called like an impact talk where someone will get up and talk in front of the club about something they're passionate about, especially like social impact, causes that they're passionate about. So it just creates like a space for people to talk about things they're passionate about and other people to learn about subjects they wouldn't have previously considered. I don't know what else I would add. I think that pretty
I
much.
think that's mostly it, yeah.
Yeah, no, it sounds great. Speaking of community, how would you describe your club's atmosphere?
Atmosphere.
I think the first word that comes to mind is like warm. Is that fair?
Because they seem to be combining people with a more technical background and people who have more personal skills, and it seems like a really interesting combination.
Jamie, I can see the gears turning. Let me see if I can.
Sorry, I'm like trying to think of a word for this because I think like to some extent the first word that comes to mind is like people are weird.
People are weird. I think they're, well, weird is like a negative connotation. I think they're all.
Oh, but and I've had like one of my like really close friends like describe like our close friend group in this way as well, because like I think because it like is a kind of a small community at Penn in terms of like Penn size. Like I would say Hack4Impact is a fairly small community that like does get super close. I think you get to know the people in a way that like, oh, I see like the different sides of you, and that's like kind of weird but also like really cool because you get to see like all their different interests, like all their like quirks, I guess. But I think for the most part I would describe our community as
I've got one. Maybe you can expand on the one I'm thinking of. I think where I would go with this is I'd say people are very thoughtful.
Yeah.
Everything like that people propose to the club is always really well thought out. I think our elections always take like 8 hours or something because everybody truly like considers all of the candidates and really cares about like who's on our executive board and who's leading the club. And there's clearly so much thought as to like lots of people like you know, take initiatives, be activity leads, and find ways to make the club better. So there's a lot of thought as to like how can we do what we do better, like, you know, as a student organization, you know, how can we make our community members feel more involved, how can we like make our projects more impactful, how do we fill the space that we fill better. And I think also so there's thoughtfulness in terms of like how can we, you know, do what we do better, but there's also a lot of thoughtfulness in terms of like you know, like right after COVID, like nobody was really sure what was going to happen. And so I think the community really came together as like people were moving out and adjusting. And we were still having like our weekly meetings. We were still being involved in projects. And I think people in H4I like saw their projects leads and like the exec board as people that they could lean on. And it's kind of a rock and like a constant when everything else was changing and uncertain. And we really made a commitment to like still finish the projects even though everything had gone haywire, because it gave people some routine, and we still thought like the impact that we were producing for the organizations, our clients basically, was still important. We still wanted to finish, you know, as quickly as we could.
I think I found a word that I would use to describe H4I, and I would say it's like social. But not in the sense that everyone who joins Hack4Impact is like a huge extrovert. I think on the whole, like I think the people in H4I like do try to make an effort to like have everyone be like super inclusive and involved in things that people are doing, whether it's like, oh, I am in this class, like could someone help me out? Or I'm like getting lunch, like who wants to come with me, you know? One of our like main traditions is like newbie dates. So everyone who initially joins the club is like forced to go on a couple of like coffee chats and just like regular hangouts with our older members. So everyone like gets to know each other and kind of gets to like have fun in a way that's not, in a way that's like, I think not super common at Penn, where you like maybe like see someone like once or twice and then you're just like, oh, okay, we'll get lunch sometimes, but yeah.
No, well, it seems like you've created an atmosphere that really helps you, I guess, support your work and what you're doing for members in your community. This is a more specific question. Maybe I'll direct it to Sarah. How do you think either you or your clients have benefited from open source culture and licenses?
Um, Sorry, can you expand on that question a little bit? My gears are turning too.
Sure, no worries. I'm just like, you're developing lots of software. So I was wondering, how has open source licenses like MIT licensed software and libraries helped you create projects and maybe get a project done quicker because someone had already written a library that you could just reuse to create more value rather than having to do everything from scratch?
Yeah, I think a good place to start is actually a really popular open source library that we made as a club a couple of years ago called Flask-based. So basically up until last semester, most of our projects were built on Flask-based, and a base is basically essentially just like a very bare bones application. And the idea is like pretty much all of our clients are asking us for like user accounts and login and like certain very common features. But building those features every single semester, like ad infinitum forever, would take up the first month of the semester always. We're always losing some time to like recruiting, you know, in the fall, and then the spring semester we have a retreat. So time is always of the essence. And also like account login, for example, is something that we always want to do really well. We never want to have any security flaws. So we built this Flask base, and we basically used to start with the same base every semester. And then, you know, it was publicized. We put it on Medium, and like it really got a lot of stars on GitHub. And so it's been really cool to see how like other communities have been using our Flask base, and now we've transitioned over to like some more modern technology. We're using like a React, TypeScript, Mongo, Node, in no particular order, base that's serving kind of the same space. And I think like another, I guess, open source part of Hack4Impact that might not, like, I guess might not have been considered is like Hack4Impact was the first chapter, but now there's over 10 chapters. So like having our past projects published makes it really easy, you know, having like a common website for everybody, having even open source, like, you know, another chapter open source their like boot camp, which is like a, you know, all of their lessons to teach people JavaScript and React, and we were just able to adopt that. So I think, you know, having this open culture of like just share things as much as possible has made it really easy for people to like bootstrap new chapters, you know, bootstrap new projects, basically just get rid of a lot of friction. So I'm not sure I have as much to say about like open source libraries that we've used, but I think like we have benefited a lot from the open source nature of other chapters of Hack4Impact, and also some of our technologies have kind of been used by them. And I just think open knowledge sharing is super important in organizations like ours. I think transparency is something we really value. I don't know, Jamie, what else would you add to that?
I think you covered most of it.
Covered it? Cool.
Yeah, that was a really great answer. You also mentioned all these other nationwide chapters you work with regularly. How does that help your efforts as well, besides just sharing code, so to say?
I can take this one. I think, so this is actually more of a recent development. I think up until probably last year, a lot of the chapters that Hack4Impact had started were kind of more or less like operating in their own individual like silos, but there's been a large effort on part from like not only us, but also a lot of the chapter leaders in different schools to kind of get more involved and talk about things like how does Hack4Impact as an organization and like the work that it does fit into the broader like social impact, social good, like nonprofit ecosystem. What are the ways that we kind of want to approach the way that like Hack4Impact is growing as an organization? How do we like build better like resources that we can share amongst each other, but also externally? So the thing that Sarah mentioned with like the boot camp, that was something that was initially started by, I think, the Georgia Tech chapter. And then they like had helped us kind of bring it on to our chapter, like help us modernize our stack and also like provide us the resources to kind of teach our members. And I think in that sense, it's been a really nice experience because not only are we getting the benefits, but we're also able to kind of share some experiences that we'd had in terms of like how to build relationships with clients, how to better make like community culture, how to like adapt the recruiting questions to make them like, I guess, less exclusive in a sense. And I think it's just been, at least for like a lot of the members of the club, getting to interact with like people who are also interested in social impact and tech at different schools in like different country, or different schools at different areas in the country, is kind of a rewarding experience.
Oh,
Yeah, and I think where that's like, this is a very new collaboration. Like before that, we were essentially like mostly unrelated chapters, and we all just kind of like shared the same like nonprofit status with each other, but otherwise didn't communicate very much. So this is all very new, and it's already been very helpful. But like I think where it's going is like, I guess the more chapters there are like involved in Hack4Impact, the more I guess visible we'll become as an organization. And we're really, one thing we're interested in doing is like educating people, I guess, on like alternate career paths in tech, whether it's pursuing tech policy, like there are different like ethics in tech labs, or even just thinking about creating more socially impactful, positive, ethical tech in your day job. Like we recently had an alum write an article about ethics in ML, and their role is like an ML engineer at Airbnb. So you don't necessarily have to be like, you know, at a nonprofit or at a like startup that's planting trees to be doing good in the world. You just have to be more, I guess, thoughtful about your work and your impact. So hopefully, I guess the short of that is like gain better visibility, create a better network of developers across a lot of different universities who have similar interests, open up alternate career paths for developers that aren't kind of going into big tech, do a better job sourcing clients because people kind of know about Hack4Impact and trust like the quality of our development, and give more students the opportunity to learn how to develop, because I joined Hack4Impact with like one CS class under my belt and like 0 web development experience, and there's really nothing like it to kind of learn on the job.
I would say even, oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Quick thing to add, I would say even outside of like development experience, I think it's been a good resources in like trying to build out different sections of our club as well, because something that our chapter has been thinking about for a really long time is how to like onboard designers and how to create a kind of like program and a space for designers within our organization. And I think like that has been pioneered by some of the existing Hack4Impact chapters. And I think we are like in very close conversation with them about like, oh, how do you keep your designers engaged? Like, what is their role in the project? What is their role in the club as a whole? And like, how do they interact with the clients and the rest of the members?
Okay, you just mentioned a few things that have already changed and some things that you still want to change. What would you both say is your vision for Hack4Impact in the coming years?
My vision is to you know ride off into the sunset after my term as co-director and pass it off to people. Yeah, so when we started, we definitely had like some signature initiatives that we were like, we're gonna accomplish this, and we were really thinking about it in January. And then COVID hit, and it was a lot of triage, and now I think we're back on, you know, due to the work mostly of like the other chairs on our board, we're really I guess back on track with a lot of the initiatives we wanted to have. So maybe Jamie and I can kind of talk about some of the things we wanted to accomplish in our term, and then like maybe hopefully where the next co-directors or next several co-directors will take things. I think in our term, we wanted to focus on making our projects sustainable. So oftentimes, you know, we develop new projects every semester. You know, we guarantee that like for 2 months after we hand over the project, like we'll make sure you don't have any bugs and we'll answer your questions. But after that, you know, sometimes like maybe they'll need something changed and we won't be available to help them. So how do we better, you know, ensure that our clients are using our products? You know, how can we better not only co-create with them, but have a period of like testing with them? So that's something that we tried out this year, is instead of having a 1 semester project, we had like 2 semesters where the second semester was like bug fixes and watching them test out the project and changing it around. So we could be sure that like the end product our client ended up with was something they could actually use. So one thing is project sustainability, and also measuring the impact of projects. So, we kind of go in, we look at our slate of possible projects at the beginning of the semester, and we select a couple based on how impactful they'll be, like how technically interesting they are, how engaged the client might be. But you definitely have to like reflect on the semester at the end and kind of check your hypotheses about which projects were actually the most impactful and best to tackle. So definitely just having more accountability in that space. I think education was another big thing that we focused on. So we created because we were changing our tech stack, very few people in the club, have like a very strong knowledge of our new tech stack. And so we're trying to help everyone fill in the gaps. So we're running, a lot of more senior members in the club really stepped up and created a whole workshop series with, one person teaching each workshop, everything from like JavaScript to React to Node to our new base, basically, or boilerplate. And so we're running it once with the old members, and then we're running it again with the new group of members to make sure everybody's up to speed. And that's something we previously didn't have. What else? I think we've had to reimagine how we're, going to keep being connected as a community, because we had all these, oh, we're going to have a bowling night, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And all that went out the window in March. So we're trying to, figure out ways to make people still feel engaged with the club and have for example, themed Zoom nights. Or one thing that we wanted to do is have more conversations around different social impact issues and have people have discussion questions, or have some people lead the, conversation who are particularly interested in that issue. So at first we definitely viewed COVID as this really big challenge. And now we're trying to figure out, yes, it's a challenge, but also in what ways can it be an opportunity as well?
Yeah. I think, so Sarah and I actually, at the very beginning of, I guess, this semester, so probably a month ago, we wrote this super long memo to the rest of the organization, kind of detailing what our goals, our vision, and our general plans for the semester were. And the question that we had at the top, and the question that kind of frames the rest of the year, and also kind of where we want to leave off our co-directorship and pass it on to the next round of exec, is the question of how can Hack4Impact be a better student organization, be a better community, and be also a better agent for change. And I think those three questions kind of frame the way that we approach our nonprofit clients, the way that we try to continue engaging them even after the project is over, or help them continue and build upon their tech capabilities instead of just doing this one tech project for them and then being what's next, and then in terms of community, all of that stuff on the nonprofit and client side is supported by all of our community efforts in terms of education, in terms of getting people, keeping people and getting people involved in the organization, making sure that a lot of the institutional knowledge that we have about not only our clients, but the way that Hack4Impact works, the way that our tech stack works, the way that a lot of these the history of the organization kind of also gets cemented and passed on, and doesn't just leave as people age out of the organization, graduate essentially.
Okay. Well, thank you for answering all those questions. I'd now like to maybe transition to a few more personal questions, and I want to start off with, what's the most impactful class you've taken at Penn so far, or the one that's the most memorable to you?
Okay, I know the answer to that. Negotiations with Professor Schomburg is an incredible class. Basically, you wouldn't realize how often you're negotiating. You're negotiating all the time. You're negotiating with your roommate about who's going to clean the apartment. You're negotiating, as a kid, you negotiated with your parents. You're going to negotiate for job offers. I think it's really interesting how you can learn when you have a disagreement with someone, you feel like you're at an impasse. Negotiations basically teaches you how to identify other issues that maybe you can trade off on and come to a solution when it's really, when you really feel like you're stuck. So it's not about, one thing you learn is it's not necessarily about trying to take more than the other person, trying to get as much as you can for yourself, but how like identifying lots of issues that you can solve rather than fighting over one actually creates more value for both parties. And it was a really engaging class too. It wasn't just like a, sit back and watch the lecture. Well, like 1 out of 2 class sections was a practice negotiation. So you would get like a roll sheet. You'd take your best acting skills, which I have none, and you'd be like, this is my character and this is what I'm trying to achieve. And then the second class would be kind of a debrief, like how did it go? We talk about everyone's deals and how like maybe you could have negotiated better to get a better deal. And there's no other time in your life where you'll get to simulate 20 different versions of the same negotiation and learn how you could have done better. So super awesome class, would recommend to anyone, any school. Negotiation is a universal skill.
Yeah, that sounds incredible. How did you actually end up taking that class in the first place? How did you come across it?
I definitely do a lot of looking through Penn course reviews. So I basically like heard it was a pretty good and useful course. Like upperclassmen had, kind of said the same thing as I was saying now. And I saw that Professor Schomburg was like pretty highly rated, and it definitely just didn't disappoint. So
Perfect.
Yeah, I don't know. Awesome course.
How about you, Jamie? What's the most impactful course you've taken?
I think for me, and I feel like I don't know if this is an unpopular opinion or not, but my favorite class at Penn, or not even my favorite class, but the one that has definitely made a big impact on my life is Wharton 201. It's part of the general track, but I would say like the Wharton 201 is a public speaking class essentially, and it tries to teach you how to communicate in like a public speaking sense, but also there's a written component to the class as well. I think coming into school and just in general, I was always kind of uncomfortable presenting in front of people, expressing my ideas, and didn't necessarily have a structured way to go about thinking how do I present this information? How am I supposed to actually get my thoughts and persuade people, but also put it into words sometimes. I think that class not only threw you kind of off the deep end where every single class you had to basically get up in front of the entire your entire class and give a speech that was recorded and you could watch yourself over and over again. But also I would say provided some really useful skills and some stuff that I think me and Sarah both definitely reflected on when we were writing out, I guess longer messages to the organization and to our club members, trying to communicate oh, it's kind of a difficult time, but here are X, Y, and Z things that we're doing. I think a lot of that came from our experience in Wharton 201 and learning how to do that.
Yeah, I'd say the concrete example of that would be right after COVID happened, we had to say hey, this is we're expressing sympathy to you, and this is how we're continuing the rest of the semester. This is the plan. And we learned how to do crisis communication, and it was kind of from the perspective of oh, if you're the CEO of a company that did an unethical thing, and I was kind of maybe if I ever start my own company, maybe if I'm real old someday and someone promotes me to CEO, and I got to use it 6 months after I took the class, or a year after I took the class. So I was surprised at how quickly that became very useful.
Yeah, it's really great to see being able to apply what you learned in a class immediately with your work at Hack4Impact. You were talking of crisis before, and I was wondering, how do you think incoming freshmen like myself best utilize their time now that everything's online? How can they best explore Penn?
I would say get to know your professors better. I would, in my experience, actually, I think it's a lot easier to get to know your professors on in a virtual setting, because people are pretty cognizant of the fact that a virtual semester is different. It is a little bit harder to kind of build relationships when you're not in person. So a lot of people will be more generous with their time in terms of offering up more office hours, kind of getting to know someone. And I think in general, it's nice to have a one-on-one conversation with someone, even if it is in a Zoom setting, because when you're on a virtual class, you watch the lecture, you maybe raise your hand once or twice max, and then that's like the most that you get out of that, like an hour and a half. So I would say like try to talk to your professors and like your TAs more.
Sounds good. How about you, Sarah? What's your advice?
Yeah, I think one thing that like was notable about my freshman year that I actually noticed when I moved off campus is like how many, like when we were all living in a dorm together, especially like almost all of my M&T class was in the same like area and so we would have all of these like informal interactions all the time, whether it was like in class, like sneaking Cheerios out of the dining hall at like 11:55. Like there are all these times when we, playing pool at 3 a.m. when we should have been doing homework. There are all these times where we saw each other, and I actually noticed like how much less I saw people when I moved off campus. And so it is pretty hard to simulate that virtually, although maybe like having a Facebook room or a Discord is one way to do that. But I think because you can't have those like accidental interactions, you'll have to be like more mindful about essentially creating opportunities for you to bump into other people. I mean, this is kind of a plug for Hack4Impact, but like I think it's great to join a club right now. I actually think Hack4Impact is one of the like best positioned clubs to keep doing what we're doing, because a lot of clubs rely on, whether it's like sports teams or arts, like often rely on meeting in person, and we like love to do that, but fortunately don't have to for this semester. And I think the other thing is like, I remember the transition to Penn being pretty difficult for myself. Like, take it easy. Like, don't, nobody really knows what they're doing. So like all of this advice is kind of like, oh, I guess if I was a freshman, I would do that. But yeah, don't, stress yourself out too hard. And one thing I've noticed about coping with this year is like, if you try and think of like all the things that you would have liked to do this year, like for example, I was going to like maybe study abroad, or I was going to like, I think maybe I would have traveled. I would have liked having my senior year in person, whatever. Like it can be pretty, sad to compare expectations versus like reality. But if you kind of set new expectations for yourself, then you can find yourself a lot happier. So instead of being like, oh, like, I would have been in this dorm and like I would have been having all these freshman experiences, like think about ways that you can make the best of the situation that you have. Because I think on the other end of things, like Jamie and I are coping with it too, that like there's a decent possibility that like we'll never have more, like we'd love to be in person in the spring, but we might not have that opportunity.
My faith in our coronavirus response and graduation being in person is like so low.
I'm actually, what's surprising is I'm a little bit more of an optimist in this space, but like I think like we're worried about not having in-person classes again before we graduate. And, there's a lot of like senior events and stuff, and we're still trying to like, get the most that we can out of H4I before we leave, like make the best of our situation. And like, there are some things that are, okay about this. Like, unfortunately, my roommates didn't come back to campus, but like, I have a great new roommate who I like would have never lived with during my time at Penn if this hadn't happened. So.
Well, I'll definitely keep those things in mind. And just to wrap up the interview, you mentioned those accidental or those little meaningful experiences that you had. And I was wondering, now that you're coming to the end of your studies at Penn, 10 years from now, what's that little thing that you'll remember about Penn or that interaction you had with someone?
Jamie, do you have an answer to this?
Could you clarify the question a little bit?
Yeah, Sarah mentioned stealing Cheerios or cereal from like the dining hall at like 5 minutes till midnight, something like that. Like things that are really meaningful, even if they aren't super popular or something, like interactions with friends or staying up all night to see the sunset in Philadelphia or something like that, anything. Just something that you'll remember when you look back.
I can take it, Jamie, while you're still thinking. I think a lot of mine are actually related to Hack4Impact. Our yearly retreat is like right after winter break, and the past 2 years we've gone to Princeton, New Jersey. It's kind of like the suburban house, and there's like 20 or 25 of us there, and we all kind of like set up like sleeping bags or sleep on couches or various beds because it's kind of a big house. And retreat is really special because like you're a newbie, I guess, for the first semester in Hack4Impact, and now we're welcoming the newbies to be like, well, these, I don't know, we're not super creative with the naming, but it's like, we give these speeches like, basically like thanking these people for the first semester and kind of formally inviting them into the club. And so I like really remember like my first retreat, like how special and like serendipitous it was, and how appreciated I felt when some people like spoke about, you know, my like how well I had done in my first semester. And then on the flip side, you know, when we have our final banquet, we have, you know, instead of having people give speeches for the new members, we have people give speeches for the outgoing seniors. I think another thing is like on our like Hack4Impact, like our, I guess it's called initiation. It's really like, some people use the word initiation to talk about hazing, but it's like basically just a big fun like scavenger hunt. And the last part of that is like the newbie class kind of sits in a circle and like talks kind of quietly, I guess, about their personal experiences and bonds on a deep level. I think one thing I was missing, like at least early in my freshman year at Penn, and even sometimes later on, is like it's really hard to talk very deeply with people you've just met. And I think that really like set the tone and like established a deeper connection with the people, with my like Hack4Impact class that started in fall 2018. And then we actually got to do the same activity again later on in our Hack4Impact experience, and it just like rebonded me with those people. Trying to think if I have any like crazy
I mean, that perfectly qualifies it already. Yeah, it sounds like a really great experience. How about you, Jamie?
I don't necessarily have a crazy event or even an event in general. I think the one thing that like I kind of remember, and I remember this like every year as it comes around, is right after you get accepted into Hack4Impact, there's this like period of like 2 hours where on your Facebook, every member of H4I, like current and like a lot of past alum as well, will reach out to you and be like, oh, congratulations, like thank you for like being part of H4I. We're like super excited to have you. And I think at least like coming in as a sophomore into the club, like that was something that I was like really surprised that people like A, would take the time to do that, B, like the fact that we like do it every year, it's such a tradition. I think kind of speaks volumes to like the way that our community kind of like tries to welcome people into the organization and engage them like later on as well. So I would say like that's probably one of the things that I would remember. And then also I'm excited to do this year.
Yeah, it sounds like having Hack4Impact right in the center, yes, or a very significant part of your life. Seems to have done very well. So yeah, thanks for answering that question. And thanks again to both of you for being here and doing the interview with me. I really appreciate it. And I wish you a good rest of your day.